What's up, guys? Today we're going to be talking about Cha-Ching, The Still Remains by Richard K. Morgan. Now, guys, this is, over a decade old here, and this is also, just to give you kind of a glimpse of the timeline, this was written during the time where there were fantasy authors, we'll just say authors, that were really trying to stretch, bend, and just smash the limits of fantasy. They were really flipping tropes on their heads. A lot of people just kind of were saying it was like this time was like it was an answer to Tolkien in a way. Not in a disrespectful way, but just saying that we were going to create something completely different. And one of those authors was Richard K. Morgan. Now, he was the author of Altered Carbon, which was what people mostly knew him for. But this was, The Still Remains was Richard K. Morgan's first trip into fantasy. And he wanted to write within fantasy because he wanted to put something there that he thought was lacking. I have gone through plenty of Richard K. Morgan interviews. This is, I'm finally getting around to reading one of his books, but he's an author that has intrigued me for years. He's very well spoken. He's a very intelligent guy, and I could really appreciate what he was, what he expresses and what he was trying to attempt here. And I know that some people it hit and some people it missed. But all in all, I really, really applaud Richard K. Morgan after reading this book. And we'll get into those trope smashing. I mean, this thing is just, it is the most trope smashing of all the books I've read to date. So let's get into it. The story takes place several years after a great war, where we follow the lives of three veterans. Now they each live lives separate from one another, but as the story progresses, we really get to see the connections of their past, as well as just, their current situation really begins to push their futures together. We'll follow Ringle of House Glades Eskyth, and now there is three characters that we follow throughout the book. But by all means, Richard K. Morgan makes it very obvious that Ringle is our main character. Now, Ringle is a very cynical war hero. He's a veteran from this great war that has just happened. He's the hero of Gallows Gap. And he really is living off of these, legendary fames because he is estranged from his family. Now, Ringle is noble by birth, but his sexual orientation has actually caused this divide between him and his family, as well as other nobles or anybody that really just knows of his sexual orientation, because here in this world, it's not something that's just frowned upon or something. It's straight up illegal and punishable by death. And then we got Egar Dragonsbane. And now Egar is basically, he's like the chieftain of this clan. They're like a nomadic clan. They were a very proud people. But Egar is having a tough time being the leader of this clan. And by all means, though, too, it doesn't look like he is a good leader when we first really meet Egar. It seems like he's more interested in running around chasing girls than really bringing any kind of pride to his people. But at the same time, too, you can see a lot of backstabbing and just strife amongst the people. He doesn't really come off as this bad guy or even a straight up incompetent, but you can kind of understand their side of the argument. Now, as the story progresses, I will definitely say that Egar becomes more entertaining and more badass. And then we have Arkith, who is the half-breed last of her kind. She's an amazing, just intelligent, capable warrior woman who has now been reduced after the war to an advisor for the Emperor. And this is just a job that's not what it's all cracked up to be, because the Emperor is a huge horse's ass. So Arkith is basically just, not really digging her job. She's very lonely, and she's become drug dependent. Throughout this whole story, I would say, Arkith is definitely an addict because she relies on a certain drug throughout this whole story. We get to learn a lot about the world, like the ins and outs, the political views and stuff of this world through Arkith's character. I mean, like I said, a lot of these three separate stories are very disconnected, and it's kind of hard to grasp what the heck is just going on exactly until you get further down the line. The overall tone is very dark, it's very depressing, it can be heartbreaking, it's sexual. It is all these things rolled into one and then amplified by 1,000. Like I said in the beginning of this review, Richard K. Morgan was really coming at this series trying to implement something he saw that wasn't there, or trying to just toss tropes on their asses. And so that's what I'm saying here. It's like, this is a dark and depressing book, and you will feel that tone. I'm not saying it's going to make you depressed. It very well could, but I feel like this is that difference. It is a switch from Tolkien and maybe more like uplifting fantasy quests and journeys. This is a dark, depressing tale, and it really like highlights some just like despicable elements. Richard K. Morgan also really brings us something new and different through world building here, because as for a fantasy world, it's got a lot of sci-fi stirred in. For one, the planet itself, this world, has a band around it, kind of like, the rings around Saturn. But the band gives off light on the world, and it seems like different times of the day or different seasons, you can get different kind of band light, which definitely gives it a new, unique kind of atmosphere as far as fantasy, as well as Richard K. Morgan sprinkles in like alien races and some other stuff. I just don't want to get too spoilery here. As well as, Richard K. Morgan brings us some really horrifying aspects to world building as well. We have like slavery and a slave trade, which is just, it's horrible. It's dark. It's disturbing. As well as just straight up like supernatural horror, like world building elements. And without trying to spoil too much, I'll just say, living heads on tree stumps. Ugh. The action in the book, before I read this book, I had heard from multiple people that nobody does violence like Richard K. Morgan. And after reading the book, I'd agree with them, because this thing is steeped in violence, and Richard K. Morgan is, he's a master. Like he has a beautiful writing style, and it kind of reminds, think of kind of similar to Abercrombie, the way he can really describe mayhem and battle and blood bubbling and all that. Richard K. Morgan, I feel like, even adds on to that. And really, when you're in this violence of his, when you think it probably should be over, it's not. You really linger in the violence and the action. It's all seems to be drawn out just that extra inch that you will notice. Trust me. This is, like I said, when I was reading this, I was like, holy crap, like this is brutal. Like, damn. Like, I could tell that Richard K. Morgan was doing something different, for sure. And the action, it's bloody good. Next thing I want to talk about is something I probably won't talk about a whole lot, except for maybe in Richard K. Morgan books, but is the sex. Because this book is very sexual. It's very erotic. It caught me off guard, maybe even just by how erotic it is. I swear, there's some scenes where, I was just like, whew, it's getting hot in here. They were steamy. So yes, Richard K. Morgan definitely brought that aspect into fantasy, and to a level I've never seen. And honestly, and personally, I think I fall in the category of folks that kind of like their sex in their books to be more implied than to go into graphic detail. But Richard K. Morgan ain't like that, man. He likes graphic detail, and the sex in this book is, kind of like the violence. It's graphic. And it can be shocking at times as well. It could catch you off guard, and it can make you feel uncomfortable. But I do think that that's one of the reasons why this book is so sexual. I think that that's something that Morgan is trying to do, for the reader, is he's trying to give you these heavy-hitting subjects, or these things that are going to make you feel uncomfortable. He wants you to feel this stuff. He wants you to experience it because you haven't got to experience it before, is, kind of his opinion, So it's just like, boom, here you go. Steamy sex. All right, that's a perfect segue for me to talk about the topic of Ringle's sexual orientation. Because, guys, this book was written a while ago. It's not exactly... this would have been a much bigger deal over a decade ago to make your main character gay than it is, like, today. But just not just that, okay? I want to go into this because in case anybody... I know I did see some criticism, but not much. But this is the thing. Richard K. Morgan did not make Ringle gay for shock value. He's not just gay so he could say that he had a gay main character. Not whatsoever. Now, I mean, from somewhat... I'm speaking from somewhat of it, like an ignorant like place, right? Because I'm a straight man, so I can't say like, oh, he portrayed a gay man to the T. You know, I can't personally say that, but what I can say is that Ringle being gay is a huge part of this story. It's what's marginalized him to the other nobles and his family, because Ringle really is a hero and he really does want to defend the little guy. And why? Because he's been the little guy in the eyes of all these people that, you know, he probably wants to respect him. So this, you know, Ringle has lived this life of being, you know, reduced down to nothing, and he is a hero. So, I mean, he has these conflicts, and they, you know, they play out throughout the story. Not only that, we get flashbacks, and really, you know, his sexual orientation is a big thing in which, you know, shaped Ringle as a youth. You know, we get to learn a little bit about his, you know, his ex-lover, and really how that whole thing plays out, and it's heartbreaking. And it also kind of describes, like, you know, you start to understand the name of the book, which once you do, you realize how amazingly awesome that name is. But I'm kind of getting off topic here. All in all, like, really what I'm just wanting to say is that I was really impressed with how Richard K. Morgan handled his main character as being, you know, as being gay. Because, like I said, it was extremely well done. I don't know if I could see this easily being fumbled or done wrong, and there was no point in the story where I felt like it had been handled wrong. Yes, like I said earlier, some of these sexual, you know, escapades and scenes are going to be too hot for some, but I don't think that's not taking away from the point that Ringle being gay is a huge thing in this world. You know what I mean? It could absolutely get him imprisoned or killed. The fact that he's a hero is probably the only thing that keeps people from trying to do that for him. So all in all, I'm trying to get my point across here is that it was not just done for shock value or for like some kind of brownie points, maybe with the gay community. It's done very well, and it's done in a manner that you just don't see in fantasy. Score points for Morgan again. Some other examples of trope smashing in here. I mean, there's a Deus Ex Machina moment, and at first I wasn't sure if like it was just in there or if it was him poking fun. But him poking fun would make much more sense and would, you know, kind of line up with everything else he did. But it's a straight up Deus Ex Machina moment that's even talked about as a Deus Ex Machina moment. Yeah. Anyway. The next one also being Ringle, the main character's name. It took me a little while in, but I realized, dude, Ringle is the name of the sword that Fingolfin wields when he goes to battle with Morgoth. So I thought that was also kind of a cool thing, because in my head I'm thinking, oh, Richard K. Morgan took one of Tolkien's weapons and used it against him. You know, in a respectful way. Now, I want to talk about some stuff that, you know, maybe is a con about the book, because obviously I love the book, but there are just some straight up obvious cons to it. The main one for me being that it's just hard to read. This is not an easy read. This is probably the second or third time I've picked this book up, and the first time I was able to finish it. Most assuredly, that's because this was also a buddy read on the Discord channel, so I had plenty of friends reading alongside with me. So yes, I was able to keep up, but I did have to go back and reread a couple things. But having friends there along my side kind of helped guide me along as well. But I cannot deny how hard this thing is to read. It's just not that easy. I do feel once you get a feel for like Morgan's style, it becomes so much easier. But there's still some pitfalls here and there. There's some like internal monologuing and like past conversations that happen that are just, the way that they're done are a little confusing and can be a little jarring and can catch you off guard. all in all I'm just trying to say is that this is an amazing story, and it is kick-ass, but it is also hard to read. Another thing just being, like I said earlier, the three narratives, like the three separate stories, like that's slowly converging into one. Like when you're reading it, you kind of know that's what's happening, but at the same time, you can't help but think that you're reading three different stories. They feel disjointed, disconnected, slowly little pieces that, pop up, start to, fill those gaps and make the connections. But for a good chunk of this book, it just feels like you're reading three different stories. All in all, I really enjoyed this tale. I'm really looking forward to getting into the rest of the trilogy. I'm going to be picking up the Cold Commands next month. Now, my 2 cents for the slow and the struggling. For the struggling reader, man, I just would tell you probably not to go down this route. I would get some experience in your belt before tackling this bad boy, because it's just not that easy to read. And if you do go to read it, I would definitely recommend reading it with friends, because I feel like you could read this book 3 times and keep finding new stuff. So it helps to have people alongside you, because they might pick up little things that you missed, and it really helps when you all reach the finish line. You all kind of collectively shared bits of information that each one might have missed, and you all kind of have a greater understanding of the story in the end. I know that's my experience, and I don't really consider myself a struggling reader anymore, but man, this one definitely had some hurdles for me to get over. The slow reader, if these pitfalls are not your deal, this is a book worth your time if you want to read something different. If you want to read something that's violent and sexual and just contains all the stuff that fantasy, let's face it, has been missing. Things have changed a lot over the years, but this book is kick-ass, and it's worth your time. Just know it's not as, easily to digest as these other tales. It will make you work quite a bit, but I feel like the story is worth it. Now, as always, thanks for spending some time down here at the channel. And to Richard K. Morgan, dude, you got some guts, you got some talent, you're obviously intelligent, you're maybe too intelligent for this dummy, but man, I just appreciate your attempt to bring something new to fantasy. And I'm sure there's going to be plenty of haters out there just saying it was for shock value or this or that, but that's not the experience I had, sir. I enjoyed it, and I intend to continue. Thank you. All right, guys, as always,